All right, you are a first-time home buyer. Congratulations, ready to make the jump. 7 things that I want you to remember. We're gonna go over 7 things today to keep in mind as we go from becoming a home buyer for your very first time. These are important things. They're gonna make things a lot easier if we go through each of these 7 steps. Let's get you started. This is Steve with the Milone home team with EXP here in the North Georgia area. So we do work with first-time home buyers here in North Georgia, but if you're anywhere in the country, our EXP network actually allows us to work kind of around the country. We've got a whole kind of list of bulldog agents that we work with. So if you need help finding somebody, let us know. But let's talk about it. Let's assume you work in the North Georgia area. We're here to help out. Let's talk about it. 7 things I want to go over. These are 7 things that you need to remember. And you can find these lists anywhere on the internet, but I kind of break it down to just 7. We're gonna keep it moving, go through these pretty quick, but this will give you an idea of what you need to do to get the ball rolling. Because a lot of times it becomes a question of, do I wanna do it? Am I ready to do it? Whatever. And sometimes when you just look at yourself in the mirror and say, it's time to do this, time to buy a house. So when you get to that point, you say, it's time to buy a house, what do we do? So I got a list of 7, here we go. First thing to do, prep work. That means starting to stockpile some money, okay? Because you need money for the down payment, you're gonna need money for closing costs. The other thing I want you to do is I want you to keep your credit in mind, okay? We wanna have credit scores good enough to get a loan. How much do you need? That's gonna come as we get into number 2 and number 3. We'll talk about that in just a minute, okay? But I want you to start thinking credit-wise. Part of that is keep in mind, when you start getting your credit pulled, they're gonna start looking at all the stuff that you're doing credit-wise. From this point forward, if you decide today, I'm going to buy a house in the next 6 months, great. Stop borrowing money. Stop getting your credit hit on anything other than looking for a mortgage person, okay? So keep that in mind. Pay off everything on time. Don't close any credit card accounts. It's okay to pay them down, but don't close credit card accounts because those have history. That history, if it's good, is going to keep your credit score high. If you have a really good credit card that you've been paying on for a couple of years and then you close it out, you know, that's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing to do before you get your loan though, because that's good credit history and that's gonna help you to get a better rate potentially. So keep that in mind, pay it down, but don't close it yet. And the same thing with installment plans. If you have like a loan on your car, let's say, and I can pay it all off right now. Maybe pay it down, but don't pay it completely off until after closing. After closing, shoot, close credit cards, do that, whatever. Get yourself in a good financial spot after closing because then you got to pay on the house. But keep that in mind. We want to keep our credit clean. That's something we'll talk about in number 2. If you get to us in number 2, keep your credit clean, start stockpiling some money. It's number 1. Second thing you need to do, it's time to find an agent, okay? And 2 and 3 are kind of hand in hand. So we'll call it like 2, 3, 3, 2, whatever it is. But this is the point we're gonna find an agent. What are you looking for in an agent? You're looking for an agent, somebody who has been through the war, okay? They have seen it. They have gone through inspections. They've gone through houses. They've gone through price negotiations. They've gone through multiple offer situations. Ask the agent, if we get a multiple offer situation, how are you gonna help me win? If we get into a multiple offer situation, we have to give stuff up. What can we give up but still maintain the opportunity to get an inspection, things like that? You know, you want somebody who's been through the war. If you're a first-time home buyer, one of the worst things that you can do, I won't say one of the worst things you can do, but maybe it's one of the worst things you can do, is go with an agent who has never bought a house and has nobody looking over their shoulder. Everybody's going into it just completely brand new. If you're brand new, there's nothing wrong with going in with somebody that knows this is how we do it, okay? And we kind of approach it from a standpoint of, if we're with you, we're gonna help you buy that first thing and first house and make it sing and dance, make it a seamless process as possible. And then from there, we're gonna build a relationship over time to where we work together forever and ever and ever. That's how we do our business. That's what you wanna look for in a real estate agent. Somebody who's been through the war, they know what the heck is going on, okay? And they're gonna sit down with you and do what's called a buyer strategy session. We do that with our buyers. We sit down and we say, in the state of Georgia, this is the timeline, okay? If you find the house and go under contract on it, it's about 30 days before you go to closing, give or take. What happens during that time period? When are your opportunities to do inspections? When are your opportunities to do this, do that, da, da, da. We try and get that out in the open in the beginning, lay out the game plan, so that way there's no surprises as we go forward, you know, into the home buying process. So even before we start looking at houses and everything, if you start looking at houses and we don't really know how we're supposed to do it, it makes it very hard. We found by doing these buyer strategy sessions in the beginning, it makes it a much more enjoyable process finding that house. So number 2, you want to find that agent, you want to sit down with them and talk about how we're going to find the house. The third thing we're going to do is it's now time for us to talk to a lender. So once we talk to the agent, we're going to talk with a lender, okay? Our team, we work with like 3 lenders that we suggest. You can find your own. You can use one of the ones that we work with. We highly suggest using somebody who's local just because it makes life a lot easier and it creates a better offer. If I'm going to in a multiple offer situation, it's a lot better to have a lender who's local, who can pick up the phone, who's not a 1-800 number and you've got to wait in line and you're just a ticket, okay? Better to have somebody local when you're actually, putting an offer in on a house. And, the ones that we work with are they're awesome. They do great work. But that being said, you want to sit down with a lender because we got to find out what your buying power is, okay? You might think that based on some of the stuff that you put into some of the website to say, I make this, I make that, how much can I afford? What I can afford and what I can get pre-approved for are 2 different things. Depending on what kind of job you have, if it's like a 1099 versus a W-2, if it's a 1099, maybe the amount of money you make on that, if you deduct a whole bunch of stuff on taxes, that's great for taxes. It's not as good if you're trying to claim how much money you make because that's going to make it look like you make a lot less money and maybe you can't afford the house that you're looking for. So it's really good to get with a lender right off the bat and they'll tell you this is how much you can afford or how much you can get pre-approved for. Then from there, you can decide, can I afford that? I've seen buyers where they get pre-approved for like way high, like $600,000, $700,000 on a first house. And they're like, we can't afford that. I'm like, heck yeah, you can't afford that. It's your first house. We'll look at something much less than that. But it's good to have that pre-approval to know what you can get. But that being said, you need to know because sometimes that number can be lower than what you're thinking. And then we need to know before we go out there so that way we're aiming at exactly the right house at exactly the right price range. Because if you're only can afford, let's say, a $400,000 house or $350,000 house, we don't want to go looking at $550,000 houses before we know that because that's going to waste your time, okay? It gets you all excited. You're falling in love with a house that, you just can't afford it. You just can't get the pre-approval on, you can't get the loan for. So that being said, that's really, again, that's 2A, 2B, 2-3, 3-2, however you want to say it. Talk to the agent, we're going to talk with the lender. Everybody's going to work together. That's kind of the prep work. So 1 through 3 is kind of prep. Saving money, watching our credit, getting with the agent, coming up with a game plan, getting with the lender, coming up with a pre-approval amount. Once all that's laid out, now it's time to rock and roll. Now it's time for us to start narrowing down our search for what we want in our house. Okay, so the big things I want to remind you of is this is your starter home. More than likely, you're not going to be here for 40 to 50 years. Okay, so yeah, keep that in mind. We're going to be out in 5 to 10 years, maybe moving up in house. We're going to take all the equity from that house, putting it into something bigger and starting to build our wealth that way. Okay, that's typically how people do it. In the United States, on average, it used to be every 5 to 6 years somebody would sell their house and move up. Now it's like 10 to 12 years, but still keep that in mind. You're going to move up. So you don't have to get every single little thing that you want in this house. So let's be reasonable, but at the same time, come up with a list anyway, because you never know. 5 things that you absolutely want to have in the house, and I want you to have 1 or 2 complete deal breakers, okay? Some people get freaked out about septic tanks. Some people are like freaked out about, hey, when I walk in the door, I don't want the staircase to go straight up when I walk in the door. Or I want the kitchen to look like this, or I don't want a backyard that does this, whatever. If it's a deal breaker, if you're like, there's not a chance on your life that I'm gonna buy that house, put that on the list. This is a deal breaker. And come up with the 5 things that these are things that we really want in the house. I want an open concept. We want to have a 3rd bedroom that's big enough to be an office. I want to, whatever it is, come up with that. And keep in mind, it's a first time house. You may not get all 5 of those things. You might get like 3, maybe 4, maybe get lucky and you get 5. But keep that in mind. We want to come up with the 5 things we like, the 2 things that we absolutely don't like. And keep in mind, that could change once we start looking at houses. We've had that happen a lot where people say, this is very important to me. We start looking at 3 to 5 houses and they start saying, actually, number 2 and number 3, I really don't care about anymore because what I really want is this and this. So that's going to change. So it's good to keep that written down and adjust as you go because we got to keep like that. We can't just, it's an emotional experience, but it's also, this is a financial experience. We're trying to buy the right house for you, for your family, for the financial well-being going forward, things like that. So we got to, we have the emotions, but we also have to have things down on paper to help guide us as well. So keep that in mind. The other thing I want you to think is, where are we going to do this? Where are we going to move? In North Georgia, I have people look all the time. Let's say one of our suburbs is Suwanee. And it's like, I want to be in the Suwanee area, but I'm okay being like just outside Suwanee. Okay, so like there's a place called Buford, there's Suwanee, there's Johns Creek, there's Duluth, there's Sugar Hill. So there's all these little towns right there. And if you want to say, this is kind of where I want to be, but I could be in one of those, that's fine. But if you're going to say, I want to look in all those places, but I also, just in case, want to look down in, let's say, McDonough. McDonough in the Atlanta area, for those that don't know, is like way the heck down south, nowhere near Suwanee, okay? That doesn't make sense to go look in McDonough because we want to be near Suwanee, okay? So I really want you to, figure out exactly where you want to be. So 5 things you want, 2 things that are deal breakers, and where are we thinking that this is going to happen, okay? Once we do that, we can put it into the search, come up with all the right houses. We start talking like on the phone, sending emails back and forth, sending homes back and forth, things like that, looking at them, and then we come up with the perfect house. Once we do that, then what? Now, before putting that offer in, one of the things we want to think about with the house, if it's perfect, we do want to think about resale, okay? We want to think about the fact in 5 to 10 years, are we going to be able to sell this house, okay? I'll give you a perfect example. We've had people who have bought houses where they had super steep driveways, and they're like, I'm okay with it. But then they realize, crap, it's a super steep driveway. It makes it hard to sell on the back end, right? If it's not super steep, it's just slight, that there's going to be some people who don't want to buy it, whatever. But keep that in mind. That's one of those little things that to you may not be a big deal, but it may keep a lot of buyers from looking at it down the road. I always say, if you're moving into a neighborhood that's pretty busy, let's say it's got 150, 200 houses in it, you don't want to be the second or third house into the neighborhood. Because what happens in every single neighborhood in America, people turn into the neighborhood and they fly to their house, right? You don't want to be a second or third house because A, you gotta live there, and let's say you're out front or you have the kids out front or whatever, and you see people flying by, and it's a safety hazard. And number 2, people are going to notice that when they go start looking at the house on the back end. When you go to sell it, it's still the second or third house in the neighborhood. More than likely that street that you turned off of is a little bit busier than it is right now. It's going to be even more pronounced, being towards the front of the neighborhood. So keep that in mind too. But those are the little things you want to think about. Hills, you want to think about being there. Do you like septic tank or not like septic tank? Keep that in mind. Look at the terrain of the neighborhood. Are you at the bottom of like the hill? Like everything flows downhill. There's like a whole lot of rain, and then there's always that house at the bottom of the cul-de-sac that all the water goes to. You don't want to buy that house. So all these little things you got to think about. Yes, you can fall in love with the house. Also, you want to think about, where are you? Like in the neighborhood or in the town or whatever. Like you could, I had one house. It was a stunningly beautiful house, gorgeous house. You go inside and you're like, why has this house been on the market for so long? And you open the back door and it goes up a hill, and there is a dilapidated trailer, double wide, like falling apart on top of this hill in the backyard, like beyond the fence. So it wasn't theirs, obviously, but you couldn't grow a tree big enough to block it. You couldn't, and it was just like, it was the biggest eyesore in 7.5 years of real estate I've ever seen. And it's like, there's no way you could stage that house to sell it. It's like, it's very, very hard. So these are the things you want to think about. Even though the house is gorgeous, you always want to think about resale, especially if it's your first house. Now, if let's say you're in your late 30s, early 40s, kids are maybe getting older, whatever, and you think to yourself, now this next house, it could be 15, 20 years before we sell it, or maybe we stay for a little bit longer, then you don't have to worry about that as much. But everybody's got to sell their house at some point. So it's always worth thinking about resale, okay? I'm not saying don't do all those stuff. Just keep that in the back of your mind as one of those things to decide before saying this is the one. Is it really the one? So you're buying your first house, you're gonna put an offer on this house, gorgeous house, fall in love with it. Here's the problem. Everybody else who's gonna see this house is gonna fall in love with it too, number 1. Number 2, if it's your first home, more than likely it's gonna be, I don't wanna say it's gonna be the cheapest house, but it's definitely not gonna be like the most expensive house in the whole wide world because it's your first house, right? You know, unless you got all that money. And if that's the case, I'm your cousin and we'll go hang out afterwards. But anyway, so what you're gonna be coming up with is in the lower price points, you're gonna have more buyers. You have more likelihood of getting into a little bit of a price war, okay? So if you're offering, let's say, for example, it's a $400,000 house. Here in Suwannee, if it was a $400,000 house and looked really nice, holy cow, you're gonna have multiple offers on that thing, okay? And you have to go above, da-da-da-da. So with your agent, now it becomes time to how do we get a much more competitive offer and get the house without giving up the bank? Because it's not necessarily just the amount of money that you offer, but there's also terms and whatever. So one of the things you want to think about is when you talk to your lender, a really good lender, like the ones that we use, are going to get fully underwritten before we even go look at houses. So that way we don't have to have a financing contingency. The loan's already done. They may even be able to do a very, very short term appraisal contingency, or maybe even waive the appraisal contingency, and we'll just do it in due diligence. Due diligence is normally 7 days in North Georgia. What is due diligence? We can talk about that in our meeting, but that's your opportunity to inspect the house. During that time, if anything happens, you can walk away from the house and get your earnest money back. So one of the things we tell people is that that's normally 7 days. We can tighten it up to 5 days, maybe even 4 days. We have a lot of really good inspectors we work with that can get out there very quickly and take a look at the house, and we can move fast. The other thing we can offer is the seller might need temporary occupancy on the other side. They might need to stay in the house for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks before their house is ready. And some buyers may not be willing to give them that. That's something that we can offer them as temporary occupancy. I don't want anybody living in your house, but at the same time, if it's a $400,000 house and everybody's bidding $425,000 and we can get away with doing $410,000, but I'm going to give you this, and this, and maybe we have a chance of winning it. That's something. So just keep that in mind. Be willing to be flexible to win in some of these deals, because as a first-time home buyer, you're going to go into a little bit of a battle to get this house. Okay. Then as you go up in price point, there's not as many buyers, it makes it a little bit easier from a negotiating standpoint, things like that. But just be ready for that. Be ready to be a little bit flexible when putting in offers. That's how we're gonna win. So the last one we're gonna talk about, number 7, even though we're gonna be flexible in putting in the offer, one of the things that we do not do, okay, is skip the inspection, okay? That will not happen with us. We've done it to where we had the inspection before, and we basically said we won't do due diligence, but we're not going under contract until we do an inspection and figure out what's wrong with it, We've done that. I don't want anybody going in, buying a house without an inspection. First-time home buyer, existing home buyer, things like that, unless you're an investor and you know what the heck you're looking at. But even I've been in real estate for 7.5 years. If I'm gonna buy a house today, I'm hiring an inspector to go look at that house, okay? It's very important. You wanna know what's wrong with the house, okay? So we're not waiving the inspection, okay? So that's one of the things to keep in mind. Number 2, one of the things we can ask for, and even if we don't ask for it or they don't wanna do it for us, it's super cheap, is a termite letter. We can hire a company to go out and inspect for termites, and if there are no termites, they give us a termite clearance letter. If there are termites, they agree basically to fix the problem. Because the reality is, if they find termites, they have to amend their disclosures and say, hey, there's termites and we didn't fix them. And they don't want to do that, so they have to fix them. So basically, in the termite letter, let's say they don't pay for it. I mean, we can get it for less, as of this recording, we can get it for less than $50, get a termite letter. It's gonna save you a whole lot of headache, okay? So we do not like doing that. The other thing is for septic tanks. I am not a big fan of buying a house without getting a septic tank look at. To me, that is a no. The septic tank has to get pumped. It has to get cleared. We have to get a clearance letter from the septic company saying that it works. It's just too big of an issue, right? If that's something that we can't negotiate, we may offer to say, hey, look, we want to get it pumped before the end of due diligence to be sure it works, okay? And we'll pay for that. And that stinks, and I hate that, but I don't want to get it pumped and looked at after closing, because the state of Georgia is a buyer beware state, okay? That means if you bought it, you bought it. Okay, and there's no 7-day, hey, I need to turn it back in period or anything like that. Once you buy it, you bought it, all right? So those are the things that we think about. There are things that I want you to be willing to be flexible on, but those three things are three things that we're not flexible on, which is septic tank, the termite letter, and the inspection. We have to get all three of those things done before, being through due diligence or before going towards the closing period, all right? And one of the things we also will fight for is a warranty, okay? We want a 1-year warranty because it's going to happen. You're going to buy a house, you're going to spend all this money on a down payment, on closing costs, on earnest money, whatever. You're going to move in, and the weekend you move in, guess what's going to happen? The upstairs air conditioner is going to go kaput. If it's your first home, I don't want there to be any issues for you. So we are going to negotiate a warranty, and if we can't negotiate it, we're going to buy you a warranty here. But that's one of the things I want you to think about. 1-year home warranty. It's going to cost you maybe $600 if you buy it yourself, but it's peace of mind that you need for your first time home. Okay, so I'll give you the bonus tip as we head towards the end, okay? We go to closing. One of the things the lender's going to tell you is once we're pre-approved, we talked about earlier, you don't want to be messing with your credit. Once you're pre-approved and the loan's underwritten, things like that, please don't borrow money or put any crazy amounts of cash in your account or anything like that. It's going to screw everything up. We want to be nice and quiet and boring as hell as we go towards the finish line, okay? Once we get there, once we get past closing, then you can go buy your Winnebago, then you can go do whatever you want to do. But before the closing table, because you're going to get something called the cleared to close, which basically says the loan's officially finished, everything's ready to go, yada, 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 we're good. That is not the green light to go spend money, okay? We've got to go forward to closing, sign at closing, get the keys, then if you need to borrow to get furniture, then if you need to whatever, then you can sit back and whatever. At the same time, you definitely want to keep in mind that you just invested a whole crap ton of money in your house, want to be able to afford it, okay? So the other thing I want you to do is budget for home issues, like we talked about. The AC is going to go out. There's going to be a leak in the roof. The dishwasher is going to stop working. All kinds of crazy stuff's going to happen. Welcome to homeownership. But you just got to budget for it. It's going to happen. Now, that's the thing that people worry about, renting versus selling, or renting versus buying, I should say. Let's wrap this up. So you're at the point now where obviously we're buying the house. We've decided. But if you're still thinking about, do I want to buy versus rent? And what I just talked about might be one of those things you think about. It's like, hey, look, if I'm renting a house and the AC goes out, I don't have to pay for it. If the dishwasher goes out, I don't have to pay for it. If the 100%. But here's the thing. When you look long-term, okay, at how much money you spend on rent versus how much money you spend buying the house, okay? If you're gonna be there 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, the amount of money you spend on rent versus purchasing the home, it's a huge difference, okay? The rent's going to go up every year. The mortgage is fixed, okay? You might still have to pay a little bit more to your escrow for taxes and insurance going up, but it's nothing compared to how the rent goes up, okay? Number one. Number two, over time, you're going to build equity in the house, okay? Home values are gonna go up 3 to 5% per year, US average. I'd say 5 to 6% a year here in the North Georgia area. So you're talking about a $400,000 house. By next year, that $400,000 house is worth $420. Then it's worth like $445. Then, one time you get 5 years down the road, it's worth $100,000. Holy cow. So your net worth just went up $100,000. Whereas if you rented for 5 years, you don't have that $100,000, okay? So keep that in mind. The other thing is, if you're paying off your mortgage, you're paying down on that loan, right? So it's a forced savings plan when you're buying your house, okay? So we'll do another video at another time where we talk about the differences between renting and buying, and does buying make sense? We'll do that video later, but I'm assuming if you watched to this far, you think to yourself, buying makes sense, I wanna do that. So how do I get started? These 7 should get you in the right direction, but if you have more questions, you can drop them in the comments below. You can email us. That's in the description below as well. Don't forget to like and don't forget to subscribe. Good luck with the home purchase. Anything we can do, you let us know. This is Steve with the Milone Home Team, EXP. Take care, bye.